You are standing at the edge of a desert, not just any desert, but the scorched ochre vastness of the Iranian plateau, where the summer sun presses down like a stone on a griddle, and the air feels baked dry before it reaches your lungs. But then, in this improbable landscape, something strange appears. A wall, low, made of sun-dried mud bricks, worn and sand-blown. You step through an arch, and suddenly the world changes. The air inside the garden is cooler, sharply so. It smells of mint and pomegranate blossom. You hear a soft trickling of water, not loud, not a fountain, but the steady murmuring of life. This, you were told, is a paradisa, the old Persian word that once meant walled enclosure, and eventually gave us the word paradise. But here, in this sleepy garden behind baked clay walls, paradise is not a metaphor. It is geometry, engineering, quiet patience, and a reverence for green things in dry places. You sit on a stone bench under the dappled shadow of a plane tree. The garden is a square, divided neatly into 4 parts by gently sloping channels that carry clear, cold water from somewhere you cannot see. A gardener passes. He walks slowly, barefoot, his robe the same faded dust color as the wall. He carries a small shovel and a bundle of reeds. He is going to clear the water channels, you're told. This garden is over 2,000 years old. Not this exact bench, of course, but the idea of it. Persian gardens have looked this way since the time of Cyrus the Great, and they do not survive by accident. How, you wonder, does such a garden stay alive in a desert that sees almost no rain? The answer, like much in boring history, is underground. Quite literally. The air is dry, but beneath your feet, invisible to the eye, ancient tunnels stretch for miles through the soil. These are Qanats, one of humanity's least glamorous miracles, invented sometime around the 9th century BCE, perhaps earlier. The Qanat is essentially a gently sloping tunnel that captures groundwater from deep in the mountains and carries it, under the baking sun, all the way to where people need it. It begins, always, with a mother well. A deep shaft is dug sometimes more than 100 meters straight down until it taps into the cool, sweet water of an underground aquifer. From there, a tunnel is carved horizontally, sloping ever so slightly down from the source to the destination. Every 20 to 30 meters, a vertical shaft is added to provide air for the workers and access for maintenance. If you were to fly over this ancient landscape, you'd see lines of perfectly spaced dots marching across the desert. These are the access shafts of Qanats, quiet testaments to human stubbornness. The Qanats did not gush, they did not flood fields, or sparkle in marble basins. Their flow was modest, a trickle that could take hours to fill a small pool. But this was precisely the point. Unlike seasonal rivers, which burst with snow melt and vanish in dry months, Qanats offered year-round reliability. The water emerged not in chaos, but in stillness, into underground cisterns, garden channels, and shaded reservoirs. For the ancient Persians, who built empires in arid lands, this slow, visible system made not just gardens, but cities, possible. In these gardens, at Pasargadae, at Yazd, at the courts of Persepolis, everything was calculated, shade was designed, wind was harnessed, trees were planted in rows not just for beauty, but to guide breezes. You might see pines next to figs, grapevines trailing along walls, roses peeking out from between herbs, and always water, never wasted, always used again, drip by drip, leaf by leaf. But to understand how Persian gardeners made the desert bloom, You must understand their concept of harmony, not just aesthetic, but moral. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion, revered purity and balance. Water was sacred, so was earth. To tame a patch of desert into a living garden was not merely a display of wealth or taste, it was a gesture of cosmic alignment. To plant a tree, they believed, was to bring light into the world. To maintain a channel, to weed a bed, to coax a fig tree into fruit, these were holy acts. In time, these gardens would influence the Islamic concept of heaven. Later, they would travel west, inspiring the Mughal gardens of India and the cloistered courts of Andalusia. Even the symmetrical formality of French gardens, much later, would trace its ancestry, distantly, to these quiet corners of Persian soil. But the original gardeners had no such ambitions. They were solving problems: how to feed a city, how to cool a house, how to keep flowers blooming in the dry months. Their genius lay not in grandiosity, but in discipline. The tools they used were simple wooden scoops, stone gutters, reed floats. Their records were oral, passed down from gardener to apprentice. Even today, in rural Iran, some Qanat systems are still maintained by families who have done so for centuries. They remember which shaft to clear first, which tunnel will silt up if left too long, which garden tree leans too much toward the sun and needs a little help. You glance up, the leaves above you shimmer in the breeze. The water in the channel beside your feet murmurs steadily, threading past carved stone. This garden, you realize, is not ornamental. It is survival made serene. It is the logic of scarcity turned into elegance. The gardeners were engineers, priests, and custodians all at once, guardians of a delicate balance between heat and shade, flow and stillness. Yet, as you sit, one question persists. The desert is unforgiving, and maintenance is constant. How did they measure flow in a tunnel you could not see? How did they ensure water didn't go astray or evaporate before reaching the surface? The answer lies not just in tools or bricks or knowledge, but in something more patient. Perhaps it is discipline, perhaps it is memory, or perhaps and this, you wonder now, was something even more boring than that. You follow the gardener down a shaded corridor of trees. He moves slowly, stopping to adjust a crooked stone along the water's path. His fingers are stained with soil, and his eyes are not hurried. Time in this garden is not kept by bells or clocks, but by the rhythm of water, the tilt of sunlight, the scent of jasmine opening in the heat. You wonder how he knows when to flood the fig roots, or how long to let water settle beneath the roses. The answer, he tells you in a voice barely louder than the birds, is the water tells me. This is not poetic exaggeration. In the Persian tradition, water has always been a speaking thing, not loud, not showy. But if you listened closely, truly listened, told you what it needed. The flow of a Qanat, though hidden, was felt through the air that rose from its shafts. It smelled faintly of minerals. Its cool breath stirred the silk of a gardener's robe. A keen nose could detect if the tunnel was clear. A shift in temperature could signal a blockage. The water's silence, even more than its murmur, was its language. These whispering wells, those long rows of circular holes you might mistake for ancient craters, were once checked daily. The Makani, a master of Qanat systems, would walk the line, pausing at each shaft. Sometimes he would descend, clambering down rickety footholds dug into the sides, carrying nothing but a flickering lantern and the memory of the map in his head. There were no written schematics. Everything depended on apprenticeship, observation, intuition. The Makani was equal parts geologist, mystic, and engineer. He kept no clocks, but knew the timing of flow by the weight of water against stone, and so the entire garden, hidden from the harshness of the sun, became a kind of clock, a slow, ancient one, ticked not by gears but by shadows and flow. The morning light reached the eastern wall and struck the grapevine at just the hour when its roots would need soaking. By midday, the cistern behind the wind tower filled drip. By drip all night was ready to spill over and cool the courtyard. In the late afternoon, the breeze, drawn down from the mountains and pulled through windcatchers, passed across water channels to cool sleeping rooms just as bodies slowed and rested. Nothing was rushed. Gardens were laid out according to the Chahar Bagh plan for gardens, a design that divided space into 4 quadrants with water at the center, echoing the rivers of paradise described in Zoroastrian and later Islamic cosmology. But this wasn't merely symbolic. The divisions served irrigation, shading, and airflow. The design invited movement and pause, action and reflection. In these measured steps, time itself became elastic. You did not count hours here. You felt them pass in petals opening, in the deepening shade, in the rise and fall of birdsong. The tools of timing were humble. Gardeners used polished stones to weight reed valves. A clay bowl floating in a cistern would sink in exactly 1 hour as it filled. These water clocks were among the oldest timekeeping devices in human history, long before gears ticked. In towers, in Isfahan and Shiraz, where court astronomers and gardeners often worked side by side, there were basins whose edges were inscribed with poetic prayers, each tick of water into the bowl a whispered line to the stars above. The most sophisticated of these systems sat not in palaces, but in caravanserais and village fields. Ordinary people, too, lived by the garden clock. A woman washing herbs would set her rhythm by how long the shade lingered on the tiles. A farmer tending wheat just beyond the walls would glance at the Qanat shaft near the edge of his field. If the breeze coming from it felt warm, the flow was thinning. If cool, it was still strong. Children grew up learning that a humming dragonfly near the cistern meant good water, and a thirsty one meant a blockage upstream. All of this, every mossy edge, every drip of water placed, just so depended on a communal trust and slowness, that if you let the garden tell you its story in its own time, it would keep you alive. The best gardeners never imposed their will. They adjusted. A slightly drooping rose stem meant the breeze from the wind tower was veering too sharply and drying the edge bed. They would add a clay pot, half buried, filled with slow-release water. Not a grand invention, but a quiet nudge, back toward balance. Even the sounds of the garden were curated. Trees were planted not just for shade or fruit, but for the music of their leaves. Mulberries whispered, plane trees sighed. The water itself, carried in shallow stone troughs called dewy, flowed with a gentle pulsar trickle designed not to startle the ear, but to soothe it. Cats slept beside it. Poets wrote by it. Guests drank sherbet under its hush. And sometimes, though it seems too perfect to be true, the gardeners would hum to it little lullabies. Learned from their fathers, this relationship with time and silence was no accident. The Persian aesthetic tradition prized stillness within, motion a sense that all things, when balanced, carried their own rhythm. The gardens, with their deliberate geometry and quiet bloom, became living proof of this. They were not wild, they were not flamboyant, but they offered peace, not in spite of effort, but because of it. Every weed plucked was a conversation with the soil. Every stone aligned was a word and a sentence meant to be read with the eyes closed. There is a word in Persian, kosh boshi. It means be well, but also be quietly content. That is what these gardens whispered. Not joy, not beauty, not achievement, but a kind of slow contentment. The kind that grew leaf by leaf, channel by channel, unnoticed until it enveloped you. You lean back on your bench now, letting the weight of centuries settle gently into your shoulders. The sun is lower. The shadows stretch. The fig leaves above you have turned their undersides to the light. Somewhere behind a vine-draped wall, a clay bowl sinks in a pool, marking an hour that no longer needs to be named. The air is cooling now. The desert sun, once so fierce it cracked stone, has gentled into an amber hush that lays long shadows on the garden walls. You rise slowly from the bench, your legs loose with stillness, and follow the winding channel deeper into the gardens. Heart. The gardener is gone, now perhaps retired to sip tea in a shaded alcove, but his presence lingers in the gentle order of things. A trimmed rosebush, a clear-edged rill, the faint scent of basil planted near the water's curve. You come to a tall, narrow structure rising above the garden wall. It looks like a chimney, but you quickly learn it is no such thing. This is a bagh, a wind-couture tower that does not send smoke upward, but invites air downward. Here in the arid lands of Persia, where the sun glares through the sky from one end of the year to the next, these towers were the quiet giants of desert engineering. No moving parts, no fans, no hum. Just clever geometry and deep patience. Each wind catcher is shaped to catch the lightest breeze and guide it down into the house or garden below. Some have 4 openings to catch from any direction. Others are tuned to the prevailing winds. The air enters, flows downward through a narrow shaft, and passes over a basin or pool of water, cooling itself before entering the rooms or corridors below. It is a kind of breathed desert sigh, cool and barely noticed, and unlike the electric fan or the noisy air conditioner, it hums with silence. At night, it draws warm air out. By day, it stirs stillness into life. You step beneath one now and feel its touch of coolness, not cold, but refreshing in the way of stone long hidden from the sun. This gentle airflow, combined with the steady murmuring of water through channels, was how Persians survived long summers without ever needing noise or haste. They built for stillness. They engineered for ease. The garden was not a place to visit, but to live within a house open to sky and leaf. A refuge whose every corner breathed the logic of care. The pool beneath the tower is fed by the same Qanat, whose journey began days ago in the mountains. That one trickle of snowmelt, cradled by gravity and stone, has come all this way to swirl at your feet. It does not shout its journey. It never demanded attention. But it has fed trees, cooled walls, cleaned hands, and filled cups. Now it drifts beneath a crescent of moonlight, casting ripples that glint like silk. In a way, this entire garden is an ode to this modest streamer slow-motion ballet of stone and leaf built to honor a whisper of water in ancient times. Poets would come here to write not with quills and scrolls, but with silence. Hafez, Sodi, Omar, Khayyam wandered through gardens like this, scribbling verses not far from where you now stand. They did not write of great battles or kings. They wrote of wine and roses, of shadows and wind, of the pleasures of breath and the ache of impermanence. The garden reminded them that everything fades, even bloom and beauty, and that this too is part of the design. One might ask, what is the legacy of such a place? After all, Persian gardens did not conquer lands, they did not build ships, they did not etch their names in empires the way swords and thrones did, but their roots travelled far. The knowledge of the Qanats, the silent aqueducts, spread to Arabia, to North Africa, to Spain. In Andalusia, the gardens of Alhambra echo the same fourfold symmetry. In Mughal India, the tombs of emperors were surrounded by quadrants of water and shade. Even in modern cities, echoes remain in shaded courtyards, in sunken pools. In the very idea that architecture should soothe rather than shout, and still, today, in places where desert meets town, you can find old men adjusting channels, opening gates at night, closing them by morning. Children still chase frogs in garden pools. Aged mothers still pick mint from shaded plots to steep in tea. Even where electricity has come, even where the ancient Qanats have run dry, the memory persists. A longing for cool air through a wind catcher, the sound of water where there should be none, the sacredness of green in a sea of brown dot there are. Efforts now to restore some of these systems. In places like Yazd and Kerman, heritage workers and village elders walk together over old Qanat lines, searching for shafts buried under asphalt. UNESCO has named Persian gardens and Qanats as World Heritage Treasures, not for their flash, but for their quiet genius. And perhaps, in this loud, impatient age, that is what we need most to remember how to build a paradise that doesn't declare itself, but simply hums in harmony with the land. The final rays of sun catch the top of a cypress tree. A breeze stirs the jasmine. A soft splash echoes down the channel as a toad hops into the water. The stars begin to emerge, slow and deliberate, like the garden itself. You sit once more on the bench where you began and feel the air shift gently across your skin, as if the garden were exhaling around you. This was never about the roses. It was about the system that let them bloom in silence, about the knowledge that water, if asked kindly and guided with care, will always find a way to sing. It was about the humans who bent their backs not to dominate the earth, but to coax it gently toward life. It was about slow steps, clear shadows, whispering wells, and the steady, watchful hands of those who chose to listen. And now, with moonlight caught in a ripple of water beside your foot, and the scent of fig leaves drifting upward, you let yourself lean back. You close your eyes. The garden is still there, and it will keep blooming long after the gardener has gone. As long as someone remembers to listen to the water. Ask ChatGPT, long before a single fig leaf rustled or a canal trickled through the shade, there was only sun, dry wind, earth like a clay drumhead stretched taut over silence. But in the minds of those early Persian garden builders, there was already a plan, one not written on scrolls or whispered to kings, but traced in the sand with a fingertip and imagined in cool breath. You are now walking among those who first envisioned these places, not as builders of beauty, but as engineers of peace. You are standing beside a man with calloused fingers and a folded map of lines in his head. He speaks not of flowers, but of slope. He listens, not to birds, but to the sound a dry reed makes when pushed into the earth. This is a Mohandas, an ancient engineer whose art is water and gravity. His tools are a bronze plumbob, a polished stone, and a long-handled shovel worn smooth by use. You walk behind him across a barren slope, your footsteps raising dust, as he studies the tilt of the land and the behavior of shadows cast by distant hills. He is drawing something in the future garden, a flowing dream measured in degrees, not colors. He stops suddenly, kneels, and presses his ear to the ground. To you it is just silence, but to him there is a story underfoot. He calls this place Delizamin, the heart of the earth. Somewhere deep below lies the promise of water. Not a river, not a well, but a seam of groundwater waiting to be coaxed into the world. And so begins the first breath of the garden, not with a seed, but with a tunnel. The team he gathers is quiet and deliberate. These are Qanat diggers, men who have learned to breathe in dust and see in the dark. They begin with a mother well, a deep vertical shaft that descends through gravel, clay, sometimes even salt crust. The work is slow and dangerous. There are no lanterns, only the faint shimmer of sunlight from above, and the memory of those who went before. They dig by hand, one man below, filling baskets of soil, another man above, hauling them up. A relay of patience, a choreography of dust. Then, from the mother well, they begin to carve the horizontal tunnel, the Qanat prop extending downhill in a shallow, steady slope. The angle must be perfect, too steep, and the water flows too fast, eroding the tunnel. Too shallow, and it never reaches the garden. So they measure with instinct, with dripping water, with the breath in their lungs and the feel of the soil beneath their palms. Every few meters, they dig another vertical shaft, both for ventilation and for removing soil. These become the dots across the desert landscape, the necklace of breathing. Holes you see from afar. You stand at the edge of one now, peering into the cool darkness. The wind rising from it carries a faint scent, mineral, metallic, sweet. It smells like mountain melt and forgotten time. The diggers emerge at dusk, their faces streaked with dirt, their eyes blinking into the amber light. They speak little. They eat dates and flatbread under the stars, their bodies pressed into the warm slope of the earth they've just opened. But the garden is still only potential. The next step belongs to the BGHSC, the garden shaper. He arrives not with a plough, but with a string. His first act is not to plant, but to mark, for lines drawn with taut twine, intersecting at a central square. This is the Chahar Bagh, the four gardens, an ancient template born of geometry and longing. It mimics the divine layout of paradise, yes, but it is also deeply practical. Each quarter has a function, one for fruit, one for herbs, one for shade trees, one for beauty alone, all fed by water that flows from the center through stone-carved channels, reaching each part evenly. The BGHSC walks with a rod in hand, not to command, but to trace. He measures where shadows will fall at noon. He notes which trees will shelter which others. A sycamore to cool the pomegranate, a grapevine to climb a wall, shielding the basil, a row of cypresses, not merely to line the path, but to draw wind inward, like the teeth of a comb. The entire garden becomes a dialogue of elements: sun, water, soil, breeze, all speaking to one another in the quiet language of placement. Now the masons arrive. They do not lay grand palaces. They shape water, with chisels and quiet song. They carve channels so precisely sloped that water travels not in rushes, but in slow, dignified procession. They build narrow aqueducts lined with lime plaster, with stones fitted so closely no droplet escapes. The sound of water through these channels is not accidental, it is tuned. Too loud, and it agitates the mind. Too still, and it feels dead. The water must murmur, not babble, must speak, not shout. The masons take days to adjust a curve by a handspan, to shave a lip of stone so that light strikes the ripple just right. The garden takes shape day by day, not in bold gestures, but in fine lines. A wall rises not too high, so that wind can still slip in. A gate is placed not at the center, but off to the side, to allow a sense of discovery as one enters. A path is laid not straight, but gently winding, to slow the walk, to stretch. The moment, and in the center, the hawse, a pool of still water, is built. Not for swimming, not for drinking, but for reflection, of light, of the soul. Only now do the planters come. They arrive in silence, each carrying baskets woven of date palm fiber, filled with saplings, cuttings, seeds. Their hands are stained with henna and dirt. They speak to the soil before placing the root. They pat the earth gently, not to press it, but to bless it. The trees are planted in pairs, in groups, in sequences that make no sense to the untrained eye, but are symphonies to those who understand the soil. A pomegranate here, because the soil is stony. A quince there, because it leans toward the water. A line of mulberries to feed silkworms. A row of bitter orange, not for fruit, but for scent. And then the first leaf unfolds. The first channel sings. The garden breathes. You walk through this place now, but newly born. There are no benches yet, no songs, only the echo of labor. But you feel it in the air, in the way your footsteps are slower, in the coolness that clings to your skin even as the sun glares overhead. This is not just a garden. It is an idea made real through math and memory. A dream of water in a world of dust. The garden is not finished. It never will be. It will be tended, trimmed, redug, reshaped for years to come. But its skeleton is here, laid out in stone and shade and silence, drawn by engineers who saw with more than eyes, who believed that peace could be built, not declared, and that even in the harshest place, beauty could take root, if only you listened to the ground. You enter the garden again, but time has passed. The roots have thickened. The shadows stretch longer now in the late afternoon, and the water sings not as a promise, but as a presence. The masons are gone, and the engineers walk less often. The bones of the garden have settled, and now the breath of daily care begins. You might expect that it is the men, the gardeners, the water keepers who continue the tending. But listen a little more closely. There is another rhythm here. A softer one. You hear the swish of cloth, the rustle of leaves brushed not by wind, but by fingertips. The women have entered the garden. You may not find their names in the carved tablets. They are not written into the royal edicts or sung of in the court poems, but they were always here. Long before the water first shimmered across stone, they watched the wind as it passed through the trees. They learned where the basil grew best, not by command but by smell. They knew which corner of the garden stayed warm late into the evening and which cooled early, cradling the fragile flowers. These women tended not just plants, but atmosphere. They moved slowly, dressed in soft linen that breathes with the heat. Scarves wrapped loosely, sleeves rolled to the elbows, fingers dipped in rosewater. You see one now, kneeling beside a low stone trough, crushing petals in a mortar. She is making gola bros, water not for trade, not for sale, but to sprinkle. On the garden path, before a guest arrives, she mixes it with a little water from the hawse, so that as it evaporates under the sun, it releases a quiet perfume that rides on the wind. She does not call this chemistry. She calls it courtesy. Others tend the scent garden, that smallest and most sacred corner of the Chahar bog, planted not for food or medicine, but for the air. Here mint mingles with hyacinth. Lavender, narrow-leaved and dusty purple, brushes the ankles. Marjoram grows in lines between paving stones. Every few feet a new scent takes over. They do not overwhelm, they drift. These are the invisible threads women have woven into the garden. No walls, no scrolls, no edicts. Just memory, passed hand to hand. One woman stands at the gate each morning and smells the air before watering. If the wind comes warm from the east, she waits watering. Too early will waste the moisture. If the breeze slips down from the mountains, she nods and begins. She knows the way the scent of orange blossom rises fastest just after the air turns. She speaks little, but carries a fan made of woven palm, which she dips in water and waves. Gently over a row of lilies, the breeze cools the leaves, so they do not wilt. It's not written in any manual. Her grandmother showed her. Women also kept the drying shelves the raised, shaded platforms tucked into corners where herbs were laid on red mats to dry. Fennel, tarragon, thyme, and the prized saffron, which bloomed in shy purple bursts before dawn. They walked the garden not with tools, but with baskets. They harvested by scent. A leaf ready to dry smells sharper. A flower too young smells green. They knew, they always knew. And they taught without ever interrupting the garden's hush. There were no ceremonies when a daughter learned to trim a rose without bruising the petals. No proclamations when she memorized how to twist a muslin cloth over a clay bowl of soaked chamomile to capture its sleep-sweet essence. But that knowledge stayed, rooted deeper than the fig trees. When a neighbor was sick, it was a garden woman who prepared the pomegranate peel decoction. When a guest was weary, it was a garden woman who knew 2 steep rose petals in snowmelt. Water and leave it chilled in a clay pot beside the sleeping mat. And then there were the silent caretakers of the shadows. Women who knew which vines thickened fastest to cast shade, which herbs repelled flies, which lemon balm must be pruned low to invite lizards that ate mosquitoes. The garden had no waste, not in the eyes of these women. The muddy water left from washing figs was used to soak drying tiles. Wilted mint became pest repellent at the gates. Every gesture was part of a choreography that unfolded without applause. In the late afternoon, when the sun tipped low, the garden changed its breath. Women gathered at the edge of the pool. Some peeled cucumbers in spirals. Others braided herbs. Children scattered flower petals on the walkways. You might think this was for beauty, but it was also for scent, for sleep, for the air. They knew that a night garden must be prepared differently. The scents that lull the senses, like chamomile, jasmine, night-blooming cereus must be left untouched in the morning and only gathered at dusk, when the oils are strongest. One woman sits now on a mat with a small bronze oil lamp. She is pressing jasmine petals into a pot of almond oil, 1 petal at a time. It will take hours. She does not mind. She is listening to the wind. A tiny girl follows behind, gathering petals that fall. She is maybe 5. She hums a tune that echoes. Nothing you've heard, but it fits the garden. The kind of tune that children hum when they are helping, even before they understand how. There are no statues here of these women, no reliefs on stone. Their names are not inscribed on the marble edge of the water channels, but they are the reason this garden feels alive, not just wet or green, but alive in the way a story is. Their labor was not announced, It was steeped, it was brewed, it was arranged, like scent, in layers. At dusk, when the air turns lavender and gold, you lie back beside the rosebed. The wind slips over your face, cool and scented with lemon verbena and wet stone. A woman passes silently, tossing a handful of mint stems into the channel. Not for cleaning, not for ritual, but because mint in water makes the whole garden breathe a little deeper. And so do you. You return to the garden not as a guest this time, but as a watcher. It is no longer the first day of water or the first breath of roses. The garden is older now. It creaks a little in the corners. The fig branches have thickened, the pomegranates swell and split at their seams, and the cypresses lean into one another as if they've begun a silent conversation that will last centuries. You are here to observe something no wall carving ever records, and no inscription in stone has ever attempted to capture the seasons of a garden. Built to forget time, there are no grand clocks here, no bells to mark the turning year. But the garden changes all the same. Not abruptly, not in loud fanfare, but in quiet transitions that only those who sit still long enough can sense. It is the geometry of wading the curve of light that drifts across the tiles slower each week, the shift in bird calls from mating to nesting to silence. A leaf turns, not yellow but dull green. A petal falls before dawn instead of afternoon. These are not signs shouted by calendars. They are gestures whispered by place. The first season is not spring or summer. It is Bahar Asab's the green beginning. It arrives not with flowers, but with softness in the wind. It is when the garden's breath deepens and the soil exhales, the scent of waking roots. You can feel it under your feet, a gentle hum. The earth warms slowly, like tea steeping in thick clay. Gardeners emerge earlier. Water gates are nudged open a little longer each day. Mulberry buds crack like whispers. You might miss it if you only come for the roses. Then comes Nowruz, the Persian New Year, marked not by a single date, but by the exact moment of balanced day and night, equal, light and dark in pause. In this garden, Nowruz isn't announced by banners or music. It arrives as a hush. For one day, everything feels suspended. The pool reflects the entire sky without a ripple. The water channels sound clearer. Even the bees seem slower. Gardeners dress in clean robes. The women sprinkle hyacinth petals near the gate, and a dish of sprouted wheat is set beside the water basin. It's not for decoration. It's a promise. The green has returned. But this moment passes, and the garden slips into Game Payas, the quiet heat. This is not summer as you know it. There are no loud cicadas, no wilting blooms. It is a time when the garden breathes very little. The water runs thinner. The leaves angle themselves carefully to shield from overhead sun. Even the wind becomes cautious. Everything slows, not from exhaustion, but from wisdom. The trees know not to grow too fast. The roots drink less. The scent of roses fades into something drier wood, dust, the distant sweetness of quince. This is the season of maintenance. Not planting, not harvesting, just presence. Gardeners, oil, tools. The channels are checked for algae. The wind catchers are cleared of nesting birds. The clay pots are rotated to prevent cracking. The women sift dried herbs into cloth bundles. The garden does not shout its life. It rehearses it patiently. Waiting is a skill here, and in this season it is the only one. Then comes Pyesny, flower fall. This is not autumn in the Western sense. The garden is not about fire-red leaves or frost-bitten branches. It is a season of letting go gently. The wind shifts. The fig leaves curl at the edges. The saffron flowers appear small. Purple Cheyenne are harvested before sunrise by women who move silently through the mist. The scent of marigold lingers longer than the bloom itself. This is the time of collection, not just of fruit, but of memory. The gardeners walk slower. They pause more. They run their fingers along the stone channels and remember when they first flowed. The air smells of warm water and dry leaves. Children help crush pomegranate skins for dye. The wind catchers are checked again, this time not for nests, but for cracks. The wind is coming. Then, finally, Zemestinekafave, silent winter. But it does not snow here, not often. The silence is not from cold. It is from the garden's retreat. The water continues underground. The air grows thinner, clearer. The trees no longer bloom, but they are not dead. They are listening. In this time, the garden belongs to the shadows. You see more of the stonework now. The paths are bare. The scent is sharper, like dried rose and cooling copper. The pools sometimes crust over with morning frost. The channels flow slower. The women no longer crush herbs, they burn them in tiny clay dishes, sending smoke into the corners where spiders might sleep. But it is not sadness. The garden is not mourning, it is only waiting. You walk now along the winter path. There is a bench tucked beside a bare mulberry tree. A folded blanket waits there not by chance. The garden has always known. As you sit, a small wind stirs. The last yellow leaf from a nearby almond tree. It floats down without hurry. You watch it land in the water channel, spin once, and drift away. And there it is, again, that sensation you had when you first entered this place. That time does not vanish here. It transforms, it thickens, it stretches like honey in sunlight. And even in its stillest hour, the garden does not end. It gathers itself, like a breath waiting to be released again. Next season, the breeze will smell different. The rose will return. But for now, it is enough to be here, to wait, to feel the symmetry of silence. There is a soft morning breeze curling through the garden again. It is not loud. It does not shake the trees or ruffle the pool's surface. It merely brushes the leaves, reminding them they are being watched. And if you sit still long enough under the quince tree or beside the mint beds where bees rise like smoke, you begin to sense it. The garden is speaking, but not in words, not in poetry or decree. It is the leaves that speak here, and they do. So, in a tongue so old no scribe ever bothered to record it. A secret language, part breath, part movement, part scent, that has been quietly passed from fig to date palm, from rose to basil, since long before the first gate of the first walled garden ever creaked open. It is not the language of gods or kings, but of endurance. And knowing how to listen to it was part of a knowledge, older than scrolls. The fig leaf says, I shelter sweetness in silence. And you believe it, for beneath its broad shadows, the figs ripen unnoticed, tucked away like small, swollen moons. The gardener touches the leaf's underside gently, checking for dryness. If the leaf's edge curls upward, the water was too warm. If it lies flat and heavy, the roots are satisfied. That's how he knows. The fig speaks first. Nearby, the pomegranate tells a different story. Its leaves are smaller, nervous, more alert. They twitch in the heat, constantly responding, like a cautious listener leaning in. When a wind comes strong from the mountains, they fold slightly inward, not in fear, but in measure. The fruit itself splits when it is ready, not before. The tree never rushes. It tells you, not all beauty must wait for permission to burst. In another corner, where the mint and lemon balm stretch low to the ground, their language is scent. Not the loud perfume of roses or jasmine, but a quiet sigh, released only when bruised. This is a language of touch. The women who pass through know it well. They pinch a leaf, press it against the wrist, and breathe in. The leaves don't mind. They like being spoken to. Further along, the cypress trees stand silent, but not dumb. Their message is stillness. Their long, narrow leaves do not chatter, do not rustle loudly. They nod, they endure. Their roots are deep, their shadows narrow, their purpose understood. In many gardens, cypresses were planted in pairs, not for symmetry alone, but for companionship. They were seen as witnesses, sentinels to all the changes that happened below their gaze. One man, sitting beneath them in old age, whispered, "The cypress has heard more secrets than the moon." And then there is the rose. The rose does not shout its story. It doesn't need to. It writes its message into the memory of the air. Each petal, unfurled in deliberate elegance, speaks in a spiral. The story it tells is not one of seduction, but of layered attention. To the Persian gardener, every rose was an essay on impermanence, how something so soft can still hold form, how something so fragrant can fade before the evening call to prayer. They listened not only to the bloom, but to the fall, the way the petal drifts, the sound it makes when it touches the pool, the way the scent lingers a little longer on stone than on skin. Poets, of course, tried to translate this language. Hafiz, Sodi, Rumi all wrote of gardens and flowers, but they admitted often the leaves know more than we do. One poem, scrawled into a clay wall near Shiraz, reads, "Ask not the tongue, but the vine. It will tell you where joy hides." And indeed, the grapevines had a language all their own. Their twisting stems, their curling tendrils, the way they seek shade but crave sunlit, is a grammar of want and surrender. The gardeners who trained them along trellises and pergolas knew when to guide and when to let go. Too much control, and the vine stops producing. Too little, and it tangles into itself. It is a delicate dialect of trust. In another bed, the chamomile hums in pale yellow circles. You would miss it unless you stepped close. It speaks in repetition, in tiny, perfect rounds. Its language is comfort, softness, the gentle tug of sleep on the eyelids. That's why the women dry it carefully, only at dusk, when its oils are strongest, brewed into tea. It carries the day's last stories, from leaf to cup to dream. Even the weeds have a voice here. There's a small wild purslane growing between stones. A garden boy starts to pull it, but an older woman gently touches his hand. "Not yet," she says. "It's waiting for ants." Some plants are storytellers for creatures too small to speak aloud. The ants use its flowers to time their harvest. The lizards shelter beneath it from hawks. To remove it would be to silence 100 tiny conversations, so it stays. Not because it's useful, because it's known. You walk now slowly, touching, leaf after leaf, not plucking, just brushing. The language you hear is without sound, but it fills you. It tells you that here, in this patch of ordered shade, every plant is not just alive, it is aware. Aware of water, light, wind, touch, time. It is not passive, it responds, it remembers. And the gardeners, those quiet stewards who rise before dawn and sleep after the last rose. Is Mr. Dar fluent in this tongue of green breath and slow decay? They do not write their knowledge, they grow it. Every trimmed leaf, every buried root cutting, every fallen fig swept aside gently is part of the story. The garden is a book that can only be read by walking, by smelling, by waiting, and you now are learning the alphabet. The pause between scents, the hush between breezes, the meaning of a yellowing leaf at the wrong time. It does not mean neglect. It means the roots are remembering drought, that knowledge is stored. The plant doesn't panic, it adapts, and so do you. By now you've circled the garden 3 times, and it has told you 3 different things. In morning, it spoke of waking. At noon, of holding still. And now, in this blue light, before dusk, it tells you gently that even beauty must rest. You settle near the basil bed. A woman passes, dropping a small pinch of saffron powder into the channel, not to dye it, not for ritual, just to thank the water. A fragrant goodbye. The wind picks up, rustling the leaves in a chorus too intricate to mimic. But you listen, just the same. The language is not yours, but it welcomes you like a guest who has learned not to speak, but to notice. And as the stars emerge above the wall and the night garden begins its hush, you lie back on the warm stone, and let the stories of the leaves carry you gently away. You return to the center of the garden, not to the flower beds, not to the shaded walkways where mint brushes against your ankles, but to the quietest place of all, the pool. The hawse, it does not flow. It does not murmur like the channels. It waits. A body of still water, wide and shallow, shaped like a perfect square or an 8-petaled flower. Its edges are smoothed stone, warm in daylight, cool now beneath your fingertips. You look into it and realize the garden has eyes. The Persians did not build pools for swimming. These were not for splashing or for labor. They were for seeing, for holding the sky, for teaching stillness. This pool is the garden's breath held in pause. And tonight, as the stars appear one by one, it begins to speak not with sound, but with light. Look closer. There is the moon, full and perfect, hovering not above but within. A second sky unfolds beneath your feet, and with it a second garden, upside down, softer, dreamlike. The still pool was no accident. It was carved at the center of the garden, not just to collect water, but to reflect geometry, to double the space. It makes the garden feel infinite. One cypress becomes 2. One lantern's flicker becomes a constellation. And when you stand beside it in silence, your reflection joins the other's part of the scene, part of the pattern. But only if you stand still, only if you listen. During the day, this pool glimmers with sunlight and shimmers with wind. But at night, it becomes something else entirely, a book of stars, a keeper of secrets. The gardeners clean its edges with linen, carefully wiping away the thin film of dust that always finds its way across water. They do not disturb it more than necessary. It is treated like a mirror laid upon the earth. One old gardener once said, "If you can see the stars in the pool, you've planted well." He didn't mean the plants. He meant the spirit of the place. The pool only shows the heavens clearly when everything around it has been balance. Water, scent, breeze, silence. It is not the pool that's judged. It is the world around it. That is the wisdom of reflection. You sit beside it now, watching, as the moonlight pools into its surface like silver ink. The air cools your skin. A frog somewhere croaks once. then falls silent. Across the water, the shadows of trees lean in, curious. You begin to feel something hum beneath your ribs, not music, not words, just the sense that everything is where it should be, and that you are part of it. These pools were often aligned with the architecture. If there was a pavilion, its columns would reflect perfectly in the water. If there was a dome, it would appear doubled. At night, this reflection became almost more real than the structure itself. Visitors would sit and gaze into the water, watching the moon pass behind the reflected dome, and feel as though they, too, had become a reflection, a soft ghost moving across time. But it was not only aesthetics. There was philosophy here in Persian thought, especially under the influence of Zoroastrian, Sufi, and Neoplatonic traditions. The idea of refraction of the physical world reflecting a deeper, unseen truth was central. The pool, silent and motionless, was the symbol of that unseen world. Just as the water held the image of the stars, the garden held the image of paradise, and just as the soul, in its stillness, could reflect divine truth, the garden's pool taught the heart how to become calm enough to see. You place your hand just above the surface now, not touching, just hovering. The moon wavers slightly, as if uncertain, then steadies. Your breath becomes slower. Your mind no longer jumps from thought to thought, it sinks. The women of the garden would often leave bowls of floating jasmine or marigold in the pool, not for guests, not for decoration, but because flowers drifting on water remind the heart of impermanence. A soft lesson. Nothing lectures in this garden. Everything invites. Even the wind respects the pool. It never disturbs it for long. When gusts come through the cypresses or rustle the quince trees, they hesitate before crossing the water, and when they do, it's a gentle kiss, enough to break the reflection for a moment and smooth again. That is the lesson the pool teaches. Even disturbance passes. You lie back now on the stone edge, the pool beside you, the moon above you, and the second moon below. It is like floating in thought, like falling into a slow, fragrant dream where everything is reversed but still feels true. In some gardens, music was played beside the pool, not with drums or loud instruments, but with a single reed flute or a santur softly plucked. The notes would drift across the water, bounce back off the far wall, and blend with their own echo. Gardeners knew this echo was better at night, when the air was thick and the pool still. It made the music feel folded, like sound wrapped in itself. You can almost hear it now, a single note, drawn out, woven through jasmine-scented air. You don't know whether it's memory or imagination, but the effect is the same. The heart quiets, the breath settles, and the body, once taut with purpose, relaxes like a dropped ribbon. And still, the pool waits. There is a story whispered among the old caretakers that at the center of every garden lies not a stone or a tree, but a question. The pool, they say, is that question made visible? You do not need to answer it. You only need to sit beside it long enough for it to become part of you. So now you close your eyes, not to sleep just yet, but to better hear the stillness, to feel your own edges soften, like moonlight spread across water. The night deepens, the stars multiply, the pool listens, and when you do finally drift off, you do so not in the garden, but in its reflection, carried gently by the quiet that only still water can teach. The desert has no mercy for the careless, and yet this garden, cradled in its heart, remains cool, not only by water, not only by shade, but by wind captured, guided, softened. The ancient Persians knew how to court the air, how to teach it, to enter with grace and leave with whisper. And they did so with towers. Tall, silent, unwavering, badgers, wind catchers. You notice them now, rising beyond the walls, slender and symmetrical, like chimneys turned inside out. They don't billow, they don't spin. They simply stand, watching the horizon, waiting for a breeze. In the cities, they marked the homes of the wise. In gardens, they were tuned like flutes to the breath of the earth itself. You approach one, drawn not by sound or light, but by the sensation on your skin barely perceptible, a thread of coolness tracing down your neck. You follow it like a scent, and there it is, a vertical tower, open on all four sides. Its inner walls lined with mud brick fins that curve just slightly, as if gesturing the wind inward. This is no decoration. It is a channel, a throat, a lung, a promise that even in stillness, breath is possible. Step into the small pavilion beneath it, and everything changes. The temperature drops, not like a cave, not like an underground room. It's a living coolness, moving just enough to remind you of presence. You sit beneath the lattice windows, and you listen. There is no hum, no fan, no trick, just air, slipping down the shaft, bouncing off polished plaster, flowing through narrow passages, sweeping past wet tiles, and out again. The entire structure is a conversation with the wind. Long ago, architects studied not just stone and span, but movement of air, the way others studied music. A badger could face into the wind or away from it, depending on the season. In hot months, it drew wind down over channels of water or clay pots filled with cool well water, cooling it before release. In still months, it captured rising heat from within the building, creating a vacuum that gently pulled fresh air inward. The structure did not force, it invited, like the garden itself. You lie back on the cool stone bench beneath the wind catcher and feel the breath of the building on your arms. It is not mechanical, it is organic, rhythmic. A long inhale through high arches, a slower exhale through the lower vents. The building is alive, not in metaphor, in function. It breathes with you. Women knew the sound of the wind in the tower better than anyone. A high whistle meant too much pressure. A flat hush meant a block. Children were taught to read the patterns of breeze through colored silks hung beneath the vent. If the silk barely moved, the evening was still. If it danced gently, the water was safe to leave uncovered. If it snapped, the basil needed protection from dry burn. Wind became another member of the household, predictable, persuasive, tender dot at night. The badger transformed. When the air cooled, the wind catcher's shaft channeled that dense, sweet breath downward, brushing across sleeping mats, slipping beneath door curtains, caressing clay jars. Some towers were built directly above underground, channels of water the Qanats, and when the breeze passed over the cool surface, it emerged even colder, scented faintly with minerals and silence. This was the earliest form of air conditioning, but no one called it that. They called it Barahat Nafas, Kashidan, a breath drawn in comfort. Some wind catchers were tall and proud, with sharp corners and ornate finish. Others were hidden, integrated into walls, painted the color of the mud brick to go unnoticed. It did not matter. Their purpose was not to impress, but to serve. The garden's architecture was never boastful. It was tuned. You walk again now, and the wind follows, you curving around corners, finding gaps in the tilework, stirring scent from beds of marjoram. You realize something. The entire garden is built not just to hold wind, but to speak with it. The walls are angled to funnel breezes. The trees planted in alternating heights to create air paths. Even the pattern of walkways, their width and orientation, is a map of airflow. Wind is not tamed here. It is collaborated with. In the sleeping quarters beyond the garden, a woman adjusts the reed screens over a window, not to block the wind, but to filter it. In summer, the screens are dipped in jasmine water, so that when the night air passes through, it brings not just coolness, but scent. Imagine it, falling asleep not only to a breeze, but to a breath that smells like dusk and distant. Blossoms, even the animals knew the wind. Cats slept near vents. Chickens clustered beside low lattice bricks. When a strong mountain wind arrived at sunset, the leaves would all shift in the same direction, and the water in the pool would ripple with anticipation. The entire garden inhaled together, and when the wind dropped, there was no panic. The garden had stored the breath in the thick walls, in the glazed tiles, in the shaded wells. The stillness was not absence, it was waiting. Even silence had a rhythm here. You sit now beneath a second wind catcher, built beside the herb-drying shelves. This one is older, chipped, half covered in morning glory vines, but it works. The breeze it sends is gentler, like breath through lips just barely parted. A gardener nearby tosses rose petals into the air. They rise, spin once, and drift slowly back down. Testing, he murmurs with a grin. You nod, the wind passed, and in that moment you realize what the wind catcher truly is: not just a marvel of desert engineering, but a keeper of continuity. It does not demand movement. It allows it. It lets the air choose its own path, its own pace, and gives it a vessel through which to serve life. Close your eyes now. Feel the breeze on your cheek, the breath of earth, the patience of design, the hush of thousands of hands who built not just shelter, but serenity. Inhale, exhale. The garden does the same. It has for centuries. The desert is quiet, but never still. Beneath the hush of sand and sun, caravans have long moved like slow, swaying shadows, trading not only goods, but scents. And while you walk the garden paths, lined with basil and sweet marjoram, shaded by quince and pomegranate, you begin to smell traces of distant lands, folded into this patch of cultivated paradise. The roses here are not local. The saffron once came from farther east. The cinnamon never grew nearby, but the air remembers it anyway. The garden was never meant only as a sanctuary. It was a map, a scented ledger, a place where the memory of trade could root itself in soil and become something more permanent than passing camels. When you walked beneath the trees, you weren't simply passing between shade and sunlight, you were retracing the roots of old spice traders, perfumers, and herbalists whose stories drifted along the wind. The Persians knew the value of scent, not only as pleasure, but as memory, medicine, and diplomacy. And so, along the great trade roads, the arteries of the ancient world that pulsed from China to Rome, they gathered the materials that would one day soften the air of this very garden. You pass a bed of cosmere now, also called the Bible, leaf by later travelers. It's not native to Persia, but it grows here, tucked under the apricot trees. Why? Because it reminded weary merchants of home. Because it quieted stomach aches. Because it smelled like something halfway between rain and books. In another corner, there's a square of dark green plants with small curled leaves, cinnamon, basil. Not as sweet as its European cousin, but rich, almost smoky. The women use it in teas and poultices, but more than that, they use it to scent letters, a leaf pressed between folded parchment. By the time the message reaches its recipient, the scent is faint, but unmistakable, a signature more intimate than ink, and beside the basil, a cluster of feathery fronds fennel, yes, but not just for eating. Its seeds were dried and scattered across the inner courtyards during celebrations, so that when walked upon, they released a sweet licorice scent that lingered long after the guests had gone. This was the garden's true wealth, not in the harvest, but in the afterscent, the ghostly fragrance of hospitality. Walk farther now, into the warmer edge of the garden, where the sun lingers longer. This is where the heat-loving spices grow: turmeric, planted in shaded beds, but turned regularly to catch light. Cardamom, trickier, needing more moisture, was grown in clay pots half buried in the cooler corners, watered with leftover rosewater rinse. Their origins are distant Indian hills, Sri Lankan forests, but their presence here is seamless, like guests who've lived so long in a house that no one remembers when they first arrived. These plants weren't chosen at random. The Persians understood the choreography of scent. Sweet must balance dry. Bright must be anchored by warm. A garden without scent was considered incomplete. A garden without imported fragrance was considered mute. Even the layout of the spice beds reflected a kind of olfactory arithmetic. Thyme beside orange blossom to sharpen its sweetness. Sage beside lemon balm to quiet the sharpness. A gardener, walking with hands behind his back, could tell the season just by smell. Spring smelled green and sharp. Summer dry, bitter, sun-steeped. Autumn warm, almost syrupy, heavy with marigold and saffron threads drying in low trays. And always there was rose, the heart note of Persian air. But not just one kind. You bend now over a low bed and count them. Damask rose, pale and heavy with scent. Musk rose, growing wild and sweet. And a newer one, recently arrived from traders passing through Samarkand, softer, with fewer thorns. The women tend each differently. Some are cut for oil. Some are floated in bowls. Some are left to open fully, petals falling into the water channels, staining the stone pink as if the garden itself had sighed. Each rose carries a story. The damask, it's said, came by way of Roman prisoners returning from crusades. Its scent, too lovely to leave behind. The musk rose traveled through India, carried by monks in perfumed satchels. Every petal is a passport, and yet they root here. They bloom here. The desert does not reject them. There is also the matter of incense. In a corner of the garden's open pavilion, you find small clay trays filled with resin, frankincense, myrrh, styrax, not native, but treasured. Burned not for gods alone, but for guests. A room prepared with smoke was not one being purified, it was being softened. The gardener would add a pinch of crushed, dried rose or clove to the resin just before lighting it. The smoke would spiral upward, weaving with the wind, lacing through the badger's vent and drifting out like the exhale of a dreaming building. It's said that the best host could create 3 different moods using only scent: coolness and focus in the morning, mint citrus, marjoram; warmth and ease by afternoon rose, saffron, sandalwood; and for sleep, the scent of deep shadow, chamomile, burnt cinnamon, dried fig leaf. Nothing loud, no perfumes as you know them, just layers. Air that tells a story. You sit now beneath a date palm, and somewhere behind you, someone grinds spices in a stone mortar. You don't need to turn. You can tell by the rhythm: clove, perhaps, or dried lime. Not for cooking, for the bathhouse. Later, the scent will cling to wet skin, trailing through the corridors like a forgotten thought. At the far wall, a vine creeps sweet briar, faintly fruity. Next to it, a stretch of rue, sharp and bitter, once used to keep snakes from sleeping. Under warm tiles, a child walks through them barefoot, brushing leaves gently to release the scents. He is not disturbing, he is learning, and suddenly you realize this. The garden is not just a space, it's a blend, a perfume. One designed not with notes alone, but with memory. Every plant, whether rooted here or carried across dunes, became part of the scent script. The trade routes may have ended, the caravans moved on, but the air remembers, and you, now, carry it too. A hint of rose behind your ear, a trace of mint on your breath, the ghost of frankincense rising from the hem of your robe. The garden has gifted you its passport. Lie back now beside the spice bed. Let the air turn round you. Let the memory of cinnamon drift beneath your ribs. Let the scent of saffron earthy, golden, dry cradle you into a dream that smells like no place and every place at once. There are footsteps in the gravel path, but they do not hurry. You are walking again, not with intent, but with absorption, as if the garden itself has gently taken over the work of your thoughts. The sun is beginning to slant low, its light crossing the blue tiles in golden diagonal lines, and somehow, without your noticing, the weight behind your eyes, the busy machinery of remembering and forecasting has quieted. The garden is thinking for you now, not solving, not planning, just holding. It's what it was made for. The Persian garden is not an accident of beauty. It is an architecture of stillness, drawn with the mind of a mathematician and the soul of a poet. Its calm is not natural, but cultivated, measured, balanced. A system of symmetry so soft it doesn't feel imposed, feels inevitable, like the shape of a falling leaf, like a lullaby hummed without sound. You pause at a crossroads within the garden, for paths extending outwards like arms of a compass. This is Chahar Bagh, the four-part garden, a pattern older than most cities, older than most languages. It is the geometry of paradise, as imagined in Persian thought, where water flows from a central source and feeds life in all directions, where balance is not rigid but forgiving, and where space is not only walked but breathed. Here, everything aligns. The channels run in exact perpendicular lines, slicing the garden into quarters, mirrored and mirrored again. Yet no edge feels sharp. The stone paths are softened by moss at the seams. The flower beds curve ever so slightly at the corners. The eye rests easily. The mind relaxes. There is nothing to chase. Stand at the center, and you are not at a point of decision, you are at a point of release. You don't need to choose a direction. All paths return. That is the first kindness of the geometry. It loops. Every route is a circle folded inside a square, a pattern designed to calm the body's instinct to flee. There is nowhere to get to. There is only where you are. The pools, circular or octagonal, are placed at these intersections for more than beauty. They act like punctuation in the landscape, full stops of stillness. As you walk, the rhythm of path to pool to path again becomes a sentence the garden writes for you. It speaks softly. Pause here, turn now, rest again. And above, the trees were planted in logic, not in clumps or clusters, but in repeating sequences. Cypress, fig, quince. Cypress, fig, quince. each casting shade in its season, each adding its weight to the garden's breath. The spacing isn't only botanical, it's mathematical. Even the birds seem to follow it. Their songs land at intervals, not chaos. One call from the west wall, an answer from the pomegranate grove, and then silence. An elegant equation solved by song. A gardener kneels nearby, adjusting the angle of a stone channel. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His movements are part of the design. Every touch recalibrates the harmony. A slight lean to the stone, and the water flows with more softness. A small sweep of leaves, and the path becomes visible again. His work is not labor, his alignment. You can feel it. The garden is not simply beautiful, it is in tune. Even the air moves according to this quiet logic. The badgers, tall and symmetrical, channel the wind through evenly spaced vents, turning a gust into a breath. In hot weather, the flow is redirected under shaded arches. In cooler seasons, it shifts again. The architecture adjusts itself, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty. A doorway open just wide enough, a curtain angled to soften the sun. A carved stone bench placed precisely where shadow and silence meet. The soundscape, too, is composed. The water in the channels never roars, it murmurs. The stone is cut so the flow cascades gently, almost musically, over each ledge. At certain corners, small domes amplify this sound into a whisper that follows you as you walk. Not a song, not a chant, just presence. A low, flowing hum to lull the mind into stillness. You reach the edge of one quadrant now, where a single tree grows. Alone, a plane tree, tall and silver-buff. It casts a net of lace-like shadow on the ground. Around it, a hexagonal bench wraps its trunk. You sit, and the air does not stop moving. The geometry continues here, even in asymmetry. The lone tree becomes a focal point, not a disruption, but a pause in the pattern. The garden does not demand perfection, it invites contrast. It uses it to rest the eyes. From here, you look back toward the central cross, and everything aligns once more. It is no illusion. The distances match. The colors balance. The scents basil from the left, roses from the right meet in the middle of your breath. This, too, is part of the design. The fragrances were planted not only for their beauty, but for their drift. Saffron at the southern wall, so its dry scent would rise in heat. Mint in the east to meet the morning. Lavender near the sleeping chambers, so the wind from the mountains would carry calm into the linens. Even the bees are part of the blueprint. Their paths mirror the gardener's. Their roots trace the invisible lines you feel in your feet. It becomes clear now what the old poets meant when they said, "A garden is the geometry of mercy." It forgives you your restlessness. It accepts your racing thoughts and answers. With symmetry, it hears your silence and replies with space. It gives you without demand a place where you do not need to do anything but exist. And that is the second kindness of the design. It removes decision. You do not have to be clever. You do not have to plan. The garden has already done that. For you, all you must do is walk, pause, breathe, repeat. You stand again, following the path back toward the center. And every corner you pass feels familiar, though you've never stood there before. The feeling is not déjà vu. It is design. The garden is not confusing. It is echoing itself in space. It does not try to dazzle you. It tries to hold you. And now, as the light leans more golden and the breeze cools, the geometry feels even gentler. The shadows of the trees lengthen into perfect diagonals. The pool reflects not only the sky, but the symmetry around it. The garden is remembering its own shape, and so are you. You sit now beside a low stone wall, warmed by the day's sun, cooled by the evening air, and you let the garden complete its thought. You do not finish it, you do not interrupt, you let it be whole, and as you close your eyes, you feel it not only the beauty of the garden, but its intelligence, its structure, its breath, its memory. You are inside a pattern that thinks, and it is thinking gently of you. The evening has softened now. Light drips slowly through the lattice, no longer golden, but the color of old apricot jam. And from somewhere behind a vine-covered wall comes the low rhythm of laughter not loud, not sharp, just the rounded, weightless kind that exists only between women who know the shape of each other's silence. You do not enter with noise, you wait, and eventually, like petals unfolding, the garden opens its quieter, more secret self to you. This part of the garden is not marked on any blueprint. It does not need to be. It is not hidden, but it is reserved. You step softly onto packed earth, past rosed hedges and sour orange trees trained to arch like a canopy. The air here smells different. Less of cypress and clay, more of warm water, honeyed skin, and rose petals crushed in muslin. The garden of women, they sometimes call it not, because men are forbidden, but because men forget how to move with softness. Here, everything is softened. Under a fig tree, a long cloth has been laid out, embroidered, slightly stained from past gatherings. A girl sits cross-legged, separating dried marigold from stem. Another rinses rose petals in a copper basin, her wrists red from the cold water. The rhythm is old, older than memory, every gesture done as if it was song. This is the rhythm of Rosewater, of preparation, of the work that disappears without praise, yet leaves the scent of grace behind. Rosewater is not poured, you learn it is folded. A little in the rinse water for veils, a few drops pressed into the hands of a bride before her bath, a handful flicked across the courtyard tiles before guests arrive. It cools the air, sweetens the breath, heals the restless, and it is always prepared by women. Behind the jasmine trellis, there is a small, warm room. Steam drifts through its open doorway, carrying the sharp tang of petals and metal. Inside, the distillation has begun. Two women tend to the copper alembic still, watching as the tiny droplets collect in the vessel below, one a memory, each one a scent pressed out of silence. The rosewater flows slowly, drop by drop, never hurried. Like everything here, it obeys rhythm, not urgency. Outside again, the girls have begun to sing not loudly, not to perform, but as a way of moving time. A song about lemons, about sisters, about the shape of clouds. The words don't matter. It's the cadence that holds you, the rise and fall like footsteps on a path you haven't walked in years but still remember in your body. You sit down among them, and no one asks why. You are welcome because you are quiet, because you are learning how to be gentle. The older women, their scarves pinned back loosely, speak without words. One glances at the sky, the other reaches for the net of mulberries to hang before the bats come. Another folds a fresh linen to line the baskets for dried lavender. There is no master, no command, only rhythm, only response. This is a garden that has passed through their fingers, year after year, like water cupped for washing. They know which mint prefers the east side. They know how to steep hibiscus for fever. They know where the henna grows strongest, and which hour to gather it so the color will deepen. These are not instructions written in books. These are knowings passed from hand to hand, from lap to lap, folded into scarves, whispered between tasks, and stored in the lines at the corners of their eyes. One of the women walks barefoot to the edge of the channel and pours a dipper of warm water over the stones. The steam rises, carrying a fragrance so tender it doesn't feel like scent, it feels like memory. A lullaby you weren't sure was yours. It is rose, yes, and a little saffron, maybe cinnamon, but mostly it is something older, the scent of being cared for. You begin to understand now what this garden really is. Not only a space to admire, but a space to maintain, to soften, to replenish. And the women are its heartbeat, not only because they tend the petals or sweep the paths or collect the figs before the wasps do, but because they move with the kind of grace that does not announce itself. There is a kind of strength in their softness, a refusal to be hurried, a knowledge that roses do not bloom when shouted at. One adjusts a child's scarf with the same tenderness she uses to prune the jasmine. Another places a pot of cardamom milk near the shaded bench without a word, knowing someone will need it soon. They gather now near the pool, the smaller one tucked behind a lattice screen. This one is not for reflection, it is for bathing. The marble is worn, the edge smoothed by decades of wrists and heels. You do not stare, you listen, the splash of hands, the rustle of wet cloth, the slow rhythm of water poured from copper jugs. In many homes, the bath preceded every celebration. The garden was the place of preparation, not just for the body, but for the spirit. Girls would come here before marriage, before mourning, before pilgrimage. They would be washed, oiled, perfumed not with excess, but with intention. A few rose petals in the rinse, a trace of sandalwood behind the ear, and afterward a moment of stillness beneath the cypress, where nothing was asked of them but to breathe. The elders speak now, gently, about a quince jam that failed last season, about the child who laughed in his sleep, about a dream in which a grandmother said the figs were ready too early this year. Their words are not urgent. They ripple like the water they've just used, easy, cleansing. One of them holds a sprig of basil to your forehead. For memory, she says. She doesn't explain what kind. You don't ask. You only close your eyes and breathe it in. And then, as the first evening call to prayer coils gently across the air from the far minaret, the women begin to rise. Not abruptly, not with rush. The garden closes like a sigh. Bowls are rinsed. Scarves are tied. The rosewater is capped and cooled. No one says goodbye. No one has to. The rhythm will continue tomorrow. The same steps, the same sense, the same soft rituals that root the spirit into place. You remain behind a little longer, watching the last ripples smooth across the surface of the bath. The sky above deepens to lavender, and you think, if the wind here carries any memory at all, it is the memory of care, not the loud kind, the kind that leaves no trace but fragrance, the kind that carries you when you forget to carry yourself. You are walking now through a part of the garden that feels slightly different. There's a kind of hush here, not the silence of sleep, but of slow digestion, the hush of things growing, full, the hush of ripening. Beneath your feet, the gravel is softer. The paths are less formal, less geometric, lined not with stone, but with fallen petals and overripe fig skins. The scent is heavier here, sweet, slightly fermented, a little closer to the earth. This is the part of the garden that feeds, not just the soul, not only the senses, but the body, the bones, the belly. You have entered the garden's kitchen, though there is no stove, no smoke, no clanging of pots. The fire here is the sun. The recipe is patience. The ingredients grow quietly, one seed at a time. To your left, a low wall hugs a row of trees. At first it seems ordinary, just a divider between garden sections. But then you notice something on the sunny side. The fruit grows faster, plumper. The leaves glisten, warmed. This is a fruit wall, a secret many ancient Persian gardeners knew well. Built of thick mud brick or stone, facing the sun, it traps heat during the day and releases it slowly through the night. Against its surface, delicate fruits that could not normally survive the cold, like apricots, grapes, even citruscan, thrive in the desert's edge. A girl walks along the base of the wall now, plucking a few figs from the shaded side. She carries a small cloth pouch. She doesn't rush. She knows which ones are ready. Her hands know without squeezing. It's not taught in books, it's learned by fingertip, by scent, by watching the birds. The birds always know first. And farther down the path, you see the pomegranates. Their red skins split slightly where the sun has kissed too long. Inside, the arils gleam like rubies. In Persian poetry, the pomegranate is the fruit of longing. In Persian kitchens, it's the base of stew. And in Persian gardens, it is the teacher of patience. The tree takes years to fruit. The fruit takes months to sweeten. And even then, it does not surrender easily. You must peel it gently. You must stain your fingers. There is no hurried way to eat a pomegranate. The fruit enforces slowness. Next to them, the quince trees spread low, their fruit knobby yellow, hard to the bite. But when baked tar, then it softens into something floral, honeyed, dense with warmth. These trees are never planted alone. They need companionship. A gardener once said, "Quince sweetens when it feels seen." It wasn't science, but it wasn't wrong. Overhead, grapevines are strung across wooden trellises, casting dappled shadows on the stone path. Their clusters hang heavy, like thought waiting to be spoken. Beneath the shade of the vines, clay amphorae are stacked to catch runoff water. Some of these grapes will be pressed. Others will be dried slowly into raisins on linen cloths in the sun. Even their leaves are used blanched and wrapped around rice, lamb, and cinnamon, then steamed gently until tender. Nothing here is wasted. And beyond the trellis peaches, surprisingly small but furred and fragrant. Not the enormous kind of modern markets, but the kind that fits easily in a child's hand. The kind that offers a single, perfect bite before dripping down your wrist. Their trees are pruned low. The gardeners do not climb to harvest them. They wait for the fruit to offer itself. Between the trees, you see more than grass. There are crops, quiet ones. Chickpeas growing in low, whispering bushes. Beans curling their tendrils along slender poles. Onions just beneath the soil, their green tops waving like flags in the soft wind. These are not farms. These are not fields. These are threads of sustenance woven into the pattern of paradise. The ancient concept of the Persian garden was never ornamental. It was holistic. It was survival wrapped in beauty. A family could feast from its edges, nourish its guests, dry herbs for winter, press oils for healing, make preserves from bitter orange peels, all while sitting in the shade of a flowering almond. The garden did not separate life from loveliness. It combined them, and where the sun was too strong, the gardeners brought shade. not with canvas, but with trees strategically placed for cooling, not clutter. Mulberry trees with dense canopies near the sitting areas, olive trees with narrow silver leaves where the wind needed to pass more freely. Even the placement of the tallest cypresses was considered. They did not block the light, they dappled it. Shade here was not the absence of light, it was the softening of it. One tree stands apart, surrounded by a small stone circle. It is an almond tree, its bark twisted, its branches reaching out like arms that remember dancing. In spring, it flowers early soft pink blossoms that hum with bees. In autumn, its nuts fall gently, one at a time. The old women sit beneath it then, cracking the shells with stones, sharing stories between each pop. The nuts are not sold, they are roasted in honey, stored in earthen pots, and offered on winter nights with hot milk and dried dates. You sit now beneath that tree. You can hear the garden breathe around you, not with air alone, but with time. Ripening is not loud. Nourishment is not announced. You feel it in the quiet ache of roots, in the sag of ripe peaches, in the warmth of a sunlit wall. A gardener passes with a shallow basket of herbsdill, tarragon, mint, fenugreek. He pauses to rinse them in the channel. Their scent rises, green and sharp, like memory waking up. These will flavor a stew. These will dry on racks. These will line the insides of bread. These will keep the body from forgetting the earth it came from. There's a saying among the oldest, caretakers here, let the garden eat first. What they mean is this: before you take, you must tend. Before you harvest, you must water. Before you consume, you must kneel beside the plant and notice it. Not to pray, not even to thank, just to see it. That's how the relationship stays balanced. You rise slowly now, body warm from stillness, heart settled by the nearness of growing things. The sun has lowered enough that your shadow stretches long across the gravel. A fig falls behind you with a sound like a soft drumbeat. The garden offers again, and as you walk back through the arbor, past fruit walls still warm from the day, you understand something new, that paradise is not a place of endless luxury. It is a place where every bite is earned, every drop of sweetness, cradled in work and rhythm and return. Evening does not arrive all at once in the Persian garden. It descends the way rose petals fall gently, without insistence, as if the air itself is tucking the world in. There is no loud shift, no sudden dimming. Instead, colors begin to hum lower in their register. The blue tiles cool from sapphire to slate. The peach tree shadows stretch long across the courtyard stones like sighs after a long conversation. The birds, who chirped like gossipers all day, settle now into their feathers and begin to disappear into branches you can no longer fully see. You are still walking. Slower now, led not by paths, but by quiet. The breeze, once busy with scent, now carries only coolness and the faint sweetness of wood smoke. The garden does not sleep, but it changes, it prepares. The rhythm slows, the edges soften, and the geometry that had once guided your thoughts now gently dissolves into silhouettes. Somewhere behind you, a door clicks open, a quiet, familiar sound. From it, a young boy steps out, carrying a lantern, glass-sided, etched in brass, a flickering amber light dancing within. He places it on a low ledge, adjusting its position with practiced care. Then another appears across the channel, and then another, floating across the surface of the pool. Not many, just enough to mark the contours of the garden. like stars gently mapped onto the earth. You sit now on a cool stone bench beneath the cypress, its long arms swaying in the breeze that picks up only after sunset. The scent of rose still lingers, but now it is dry, more memory than perfume, and above you stars, not one or two, but a full curtain slowly drawing open. The sky here is old, older than the cities, older than even the language used to name. The constellations, each star has a lineage. Each one has been looked upon by eyes now dust, and will be looked upon by eyes not yet born. You are not alone in your looking. The garden reflects the sky, it always has. From the earliest designs of Persian Chahar Bagh, the garden was meant to mirror the heavens of paradise on earth. 4 sections, flowing water at the center, a still pool to reflect the stars, a space where the order of the cosmos was echoed by the placement of trees and the balance of light and shade. To sleep here, beneath this order, is to sleep in alignment with something older than worry. Across the channel, a man finishes lighting the last lantern, his hands steady. He does not hurry. He knows the garden breathes differently at night. Light here is not for brightness, it is for softness. The glow is not to see, but to feel the space between things. A path becomes a shimmer. A wall becomes a silhouette. A doorway becomes the edge of a dream, and the water. Now it mirrors both above and below. Each flickering lantern appears twice, once in the hand of the boy who placed it, and once in the quiet ripple beside the rose bushes. The reflections sway, not with wind, but with breath. Yours, the garden's. The women reappear, not to work, but to rest. They carry cushions, shallow trays of pistachios, a kettle of cardamom milk still warm from the fire. No words, only presence. They sit in a circle beneath the almond tree, shawls pulled loosely around their shoulders. The breeze curls their hair. Their laughter is lower now, more like humming. Their hands move slower. A child curls up beside one of them, head in her lap. She runs her fingers through his hair in long, measured strokes. No lullaby, just touch. The language of rest. In another corner, a young couple sits near the grapevine pergola, not speaking. A quiet kind of togetherness. The kind that doesn't need sound. The kind that gardens cultivate, not sudden, not dramatic, but grown slowly through shade and warmth. Season by season, they look up at the stars, and you can almost hear what they are not saying. This is enough. You recline now on a low divan near the citrus wall. The scent of bitter orange lingers on the breeze. The cushions beneath you are cool. Someone places a small clay cup of warm milk in your hand. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to. Everything is exactly where it should be. This is the architecture of sleep, not built with beds, but with trust, with rhythm, with slow repetition, with the garden's promise that nothing will startle, nothing will intrude. Every sound, the rustle of vines, the crackle of a lantern wick, the splash of a late heron landing by the pool is exactly where it belongs. In old times, many Persian homes kept the garden as their sleeping room in summer. The thick walls held the heat by day, but the garden gave release. Beds were rolled out beneath the trees. Mosquito nets hung from fig branches. A jar of cool water placed within reach, covered in muslin. The stars, ever present, watched the dreams unfold in silence. Elders would tell children that the garden could listen, that it remembered your dreams, that if you whispered your worry into a rose before sleep, the petals would hold it for you until morning. No one questioned this. No one laughed. Even now, The roses remain slightly heavier in the morning dew as if they've been keeping secrets. The lanterns begin to dim, not from wind, but from design. Each is filled only to last a few hours, enough to guide you into sleep, but not through it. Darkness, here, is part of the healing. The stars grow brighter in their absence. The moon, once slivered above the almond leaves, has risen and now casts its milk-white shadow across the walkways. You hear the soft tapping of sandals on stone. A gardener checking the channels one last time. He bends to remove a single leaf that might block the water's whisper. Then he disappears into the shadows, his task complete. The water flows. The vines tremble gently. A fig drops to earth with a hush. This garden does not need you to sleep. It simply prepares you. You close. Your eyes now know final prayer. No instruction, just breath. Inhale the scent of rose, basil, damp stone. Exhale the dust of thought, the tension of elsewhere. Inhale the memory of almonds, of water, of stars. Exhale the day. The garden has you. You are no longer walking. You are still. You are part of the garden now, breathing with it, not as visitor or observer, but as thread in its pattern. The lanterns have dimmed to memory. The stars overhead ripple in the still water like soft thoughts moving through sleep. And the scent of the garden rose, dust, mint, almond drifts, not only in the air, but in you, folded between ribs, pressed like a petal into the corners of your quietest memories. This is the garden's final gift. It does not vanish when you leave it. It blooms inward. Long after your feet have left its paths, the rhythm of its geometry lingers in your breath. The hush of its shade continues in the pause between your thoughts. The curve of the water channel echoes in the way your fingers now trace the rim of a cup or the line of a windowsill. The garden remains not as a place, but as a condition of being. You carry it without effort. Without knowing, the Persians called it Pardeza, walled garden, a cultivated paradise, and it is from this word that so many other paradises bloom. The Greek paradisus, the Latin paradisus, the heaven whispered in prayers and cradled in sleep. But before paradise became something promised after death, it was something built, tended, watered, and walked, with hands, with effort, with love. This is where it began, not in clouds, but in earth. Perhaps that is why it stays with us, because it was never far above us. It was always here, rooted in the soil beneath our sandals, traced in the lines of irrigation ditches, carved into the patterns of tile and wood. A vision not only of escape, but of return. You think now of the underground veins, the Qanats, still trickling in darkness, older than empires, feeding trees whose names have long since changed. They continue, invisible, unhurrying, as if time itself was taught to move more gently beneath Persian soil. And you wonder, where are your own Qanats? What secret channels beneath your awareness nourish what blooms above? What unseen currents keep your thoughts cool, your memories moist, your dreams alive? You recall the rosewater dripped from copper, pressed from petal land, how it held memory in its sweetness. You remember the hands that gathered it, wrinkled, patient, unhurried, hands that never claimed authorship, but knew the taste of ritual. They did not hurry the rose, they waited, they watched. They knew that tenderness, applied consistently, is power. There is something in that for you too. Something about how you hold your own thoughts. Something about the garden inside the mind. The one that needs walls, not to keep things out, but to keep care in a mind tended like a garden, a sleep prepared like a courtyard, a memory allowed to ripen, fall, and seed again. Perhaps that is why the garden has never truly disappeared. The empires that built it crumbled. The kings that commissioned it have long gone to dust. The tiles are cracked. The trees are not the same. And yet the idea, this strange, lush geometry of peace continues. In every courtyard where water flows, in every terrace where figs swell beneath a sun-filtering vine, in every gesture of quiet attention to a growing thing, even in cities now crowded with noise, you find corners where the garden has survived, not entire, but in fragments. A lemon tree on a balcony, a clay pot of mint beside a kitchen door, a tiled fountain in a shaded courtyard, its water murmuring to pigeons who've never known a desert. These are not accidents. They are memories, echoes, reminders that paradise was never lost. It was simply folded smaller. You lean your head now against a cushion warmed by the day's last light. You hear the breath of night deepening. You are not asked to remember every detail of the garden, only to trust that it remembers you. And it does. It remembers the way your shadow stretched along the vine wall, the softness of your footfall on its gravel paths, the way your breath slowed beneath the almond tree, the way your eyes traced the reflection of the moon in the pool and, for a moment, forgot the weight of days. This garden does not require you to be wise, or productive, or strong. It requires only your presence, and it repays it with stillness. Let your thoughts now trail like vines. Let your memories flutter like rose petals too full to cling. Let the water of your attention flow slowly into the soil of rest. There is no need to conclude, no need to name, only to allow. Somewhere in you, a small gate opens, not wide, just enough to let in the scent of basil, the sound of a copper kettle being lifted, the softness of fig leaves shifting in the dark. The garden has not ended. It has only changed form. It is now a rhythm beneath your dreaming. It is now the hush between your breaths. It is now the slow bloom of sleep itself. You are not leaving the garden. You are becoming part of it. And it, in turn, continues blooming within you, forever watered, forever tended. Forever unfolding in the quiet architecture of your rest. Good night.